Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from beautiful Florida. And today our question comes to us from Buhio. And Buhio has a follow-up question to our recent vlog on the subject of egregores. And Buhio's question is this: is there any difference, spiritually speaking, between a team or corporate mascot versus totem animals and tribal or heraldic totems? And if so, what would that difference be? And could team and corporate mascots be considered to be egregores in their own right? So starting with the first part of this question, no, I personally don't think there is any difference between contemporary team and corporate mascots versus totem animals and tribal and heraldic totems. In and of themselves, I think they're very much the same thing. There is a difference in how people view and interact with them, however, and that difference is very much part of the second part of the answer of this question. People who work with totem animals and tribal and heraldic totems put a great deal of belief into them, a great deal of energy into them. They interact with them in very personal ways and often very intense ways, which is not necessarily at all the case with team and corporate mascots, although in some cases it is. And so I would say that although the idea is basically the same when all is said and done, the way that people use these and interact with them is not necessarily the same. And so if there is a difference, it is how they are used or not used. Now, as to the second part of the question, can team or corporate mascots be considered egregores? Well, I think that in some cases the answer is yes, and in some cases the answer is no. I would say that any team or corporation that has any energy at all will have an egregore of some sort, but it isn't necessarily the mascot, but it can be. And to give you an example of what I mean, these corporate and team mascots come in all kinds of varieties. If you were to ask me if Mrs. Butterworth is an egregore, I would say no, I don't really think so. If you were to ask me if Mickey Mouse is an egregore, I would say, oh my goodness, yes. I think that Mickey Mouse is a very powerful egregore. And I think that an awful lot of the corporate spirit of the Disney Corporation is manifested through that symbol in the manner of an egregore. Not in an intentional way, but in a way that has developed. But that is not the case, for example, again, with Mrs. Butterworth. But I do think that it is with the mouse. And so on through the many different kinds of mascots that you would see for teams and corporations. In some cases, a great deal of energy is put into them, and people put great emotional and spiritual investment into them and interact with them in highly personal and very powerful ways, and in other cases they just don't. And that doesn't mean that the corporation or the team in question has no egregore, but it isn't necessarily the mascot, though it can be. So to summarize, yes, I do think that modern team and corporate mascots are basically the same thing as totem animals and tribal and heraldic totems, but generally not used in the same highly spiritual way, with some exceptions. And those exceptions, I think, can be egregores in their own right, but aren't necessarily. It depends, again, on how people interact with them and how much of the corporate entity is invested in them. I do think that any major corporate entity, any country for that matter, has an egregore of a greater or lesser variety depending on how much energy people put into it, but not necessarily its chosen mascot. So I hope you find that helpful, and I hope that it answers your question, and until next time, may you blessed be. I'd just like to take a moment to say on behalf of the staff and management of Magic TV that in no way is this vlog intended to give offense or disrespect to the mouse. We have the highest regard for the mouse, and I, for one, welcome the coming world dominance of the mouse. Hail, mouse.